Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Trumois, Pedekei Halacha Beis. We left off on Daf Nun Beis, Amid Aleph, Mamish, on the top of the Amid. The Gemara is referring back to the first case in the Mishnah, where you had one saw of Truma Temeya that fell into 100 saw of Truma Tohira. And we have in the Mishnah Machloikis between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai hold that the Truma Temeya, the Tuma of the Truma, is not nullified. Actually meaning that all of this mixture now has the status of Truma Temeya. None of it may be eaten by a kohen. And Beis Hillel hold that since you have the ratio of 100 Truma Tohira against the one Truma Temeya, the Temeya does become nullified. That's what we had in the Mishnah. And now the Mishnah says, after one admitted to the other, and the Mishnah did not say who was Maida to whom. And that's something that we're going to now discover, who was Maida to who, as we'll see, that it was Beis Shammai that was Maida to Beis Hillel. Before we go on, just to mention that when we learned the Mishnah yesterday, right away it became apparent that we just came off two daf flirting Shitas Chizkiya, who clearly stated that when you have one soft Truma Temeya that fell into 100 sign of Chulin Tohirin, even though that's the classic case where the Truma becomes nullified, nevertheless, Chizkiya hold that the Truma is not nullified. And even the Chulin said, Chizkiya, you have to make sure that you don't make it Tameh for you not to have Chala Temeya. How do you reconcile that with Beis Hillel, especially since, as we're going to learn today, that it was Beis Shammai that was Moed to Beis Hillel? So I was looking, and unfortunately, my Ois V'Hadir Gemara, someone borrowed, and I'm looking for the person who borrowed it. I'm sure it's written over there. But what came to mind is that at the end of the sugya, the way we learned the sugya, the explanation behind Chizkiya was all based on Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana Rabbi Yehuda that holds min b'minoi is not batel. We don't paskin that way. The Rambam doesn't paskin that way either. That min b'minoi is b'chlal not batel. So perhaps Chizkiya, who paskins like Rabbi Yehuda, as was explained, that will be the Tuma vis-a-vis the Tuma is called min b'minoi. Kishitas Rab Chizda, not Rab Chanina, as we explained 2 days ago, that worked. Perhaps our Mishnah follows the other opinions, the majority opinion, that even min b'minoi will be batel, and therefore, ultimately, even Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel will hold that the Truma Temeya will be batel. The two Amoraim, coming back to our sugya, were Rabbi Yudan bar Pazi and Rabbi Aivu bar Nagri. And when they were unable on their own to discover who was Maida to who, so they said to each other, let's go out and let's find other Amoraim. We're going to have today a total of 4 different proofs. Not all of them will stand, but the Gemara will attempt at least to bring different proofs, 4 proofs, which ultimately will prove that Beis Shammai was Maida to Beis Hillel. And just a few words of introduction regarding some of those proofs is something very interesting. Liquids, when stationary in a keli, are considered to be one entity. What do I mean by that? If you have something that's tamei on the level of an av, and it has contact with liquid in a cup, we don't say that only the part that touched the tumah becomes a rishon, and everything else, even though mid'Rabbanan ultimately liquids always go back to being a rishon, but we don't say that only the part that touched becomes tamei and then it has to impart again. Stationary liquid is viewed as one entity. In contrast, when liquid is flowing, as an example, I'm pouring water from cup A into cup B. So you have the stream of water. If something tamei touches the stream of water, only the part of the liquid that touched the tumah becomes tamei. Now that's going to be very significant, even halacha l'maisa, even though liquid can also impart, and liquids are very susceptible, because as an example, a tful yoim, or someone who's tamei on the level of only a sheni, who touches liquids, if the liquids are not truma, they bechlal will not become tamei. But if, let's say, I'm pouring wine from cup A to cup B, to a truma wine, so the part that touched the liquid, that part became tummy. It's unable, truma, to continue to impart tuma, right? Because truma cannot become a revi. So that will be a great example where you can have some of the liquid tamei, the majority of the liquid tahar, and we'll see a discussion whether the tuma is nullified or not. All of that will be one of the 4 proofs. And after we'll finish with that, the Gemara is going to relate back to the next case in the Mishnah that speaks about 1 saw of truma that was nullified in 100 soin of chulin, and now the person removed the 1 saw replacement to give to a kohen, but now that 1 saw of replacement fell into chulin. So we had in the Mishnah the machlokes. Rabbi Eliezer holds that we treat the entire replacement saw as truma, and therefore only if you have in the second mixture 100 of chulin against the 1 will it be nullified. But the Chachamim say no, it's not true. That the replacement saw has truma in it, proportional to the original mixture. And all you need, right, we learned that yesterday, to nullify the replacement saw is enough chulin with the ratio of 100 to 1 only against the truma in the replacement. That is how we learned the Mishnah. What we're going to learn today is that Rabbi Yochanan had a different girsa in our Mishnah. And he is going to hold that when you take out the replacement saw, solids, not only liquids, what we learned yesterday, if it falls into another mixture, even if it fell into a drop of chulin, as far as now this new mixture is concerned, everything is chulin. Very big leniency. But not only lenient like the Chachamim, that you only have to be mevatel the proportion of truma in the replacement saw. No, Rabbi Yochanan had a different girsa in the Mishnah, and he held that the Mishnah is telling you that if the replacement gets mixed up again, that mixture, if there is any amount of chulin, is mevatel the issue of truma. But aber b'med dvarim amurim that the replacement saw fell into chulin. But now we're going to learn today at the end of today's daf what's going to happen if the replacement saw fell into meduma. We never learned that case yet. The replacement saw fell into another meduma. So here Rabbi Yochanan will hold, which is quite amazing, that if the chulin portion in the second meduma is more than the truma, we're speaking about a simple majority. If the chulin part of the second meduma is more than the truma in the replacement saw, then it will be nullified. But if not, then we're going to say, listen to his words, that the truma in the replacement saw will combine with the truma in the meduma, and now the replacement saw is not considered replacement. Now this also becomes meduma. It's even though it began by having 1 truma falling into 100 chulin, so it was nullified, right? What's the percent? It's 1 of 100. It's less than 1%. But if it falls into another meduma, if in that meduma there's more truma than chulin, the truma in the meduma and the truma combines with the truma, is added to the truma in the replacement saw, and mitamol, the replacement saw is not good. The replacement saw is bona fide meduma. We're gonna repeat this again when we learn this inside. That's a gewaldige concept. So Chevra Daf Nun Beis Amud Aleph all the way on top. So again, we're speaking about the 2 Amoraim of Rabbi Yudan Bar Pazi and Rabbi Aibu Bar Nagri, that they on their own were unable to determine who was moida to whom. So Nafkan, Vishamun, when they went out, they heard the following. And this is what we will call proof number 1. That Rab Chizkiah, in the name of Rab Acha, in the name of Rab Yudah Bar Chanina, says that Lo Yimoitzinu Shahoidu Beis Shammai Le Beis Hillel, that throughout all of the arguments between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, nowhere do we find that Beis Shammai acquiesced to, was moida to Beis Hillel. The only exception is this case, which is quite amazing. This case that he was moida, that if you have 1 saw of truma temeya that falls into 100 saw of truma tohira, like the whole thing could be eaten, even though that itself is a machlekes, right? Rabbi Eliezer says you got to remove one, you got to burn it. The Chachamim are the ones that say that it's completely nullified, right? The Avda b'miyuta. Don't forget, I don't want to remind everyone, the reason why you have to take out one from a mixture that was nullified, why do you have to take out one? Remember, I don't understand, if one truma falls on 200 chulin, so the truma is nullified, why do I have to take out one? Because we learned it's a din on choisha mishpat, it's a financial case. It's gezel hashevet. You have to give. In other words, according to the Chachamim, it's not biblically truma. Not like Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says the one that fell in is the one that you took out. We don't go like Rabbi Eliezer. So really what you're taking out biblically is considered chulin. So why do you have to take it out? Because you can't steal from a kohen. But here, anyways, it belongs to a kohen, in our case. The truma temeya is truma. The kohen owns it. The 100 truma tohira is weiter a kohen. So the Chachamim hold, you don't even have to take one out. Bottom line over here is the fact that we have two Amirayim that have a tradition that the only time that Beis Shammai was moided to Beis Hillel was in this case. Clearly, Beis Shammai is moided to Beis Hillel. That yes, that it's nullified. Proof number two, Rabbi Yoine b'shem Rab Avai. Shom Allah proved it, knew it, min hada, from the following. And here we are quoting a Mishnah in Mesechtas Tful Yom. And as we spoke out in our words of introduction, that even though when liquids are gathered in a keli, they are considered one entity. But if they are flowing, and if something tamei touches the stream, we say that only the water, the liquid in the stream that physically touched the source of tuma acquires tuma. Now, obviously, if the tuma is on a higher level, then this liquid can impart it to the other liquids. But the case that we will be learning about is where you have truma, you have a tful yom. A tful yom is someone who's only tummy on a level of a sheni. A tful yom who touches chulin will not make the chulin tummy b'chlal. But here you have truma being poured from cup A to cup B. And the stream was touched by the tful yom. So since the water is flowing, first of all, we don't say it's as if the tummy person touched everything. No, he only touched the wine in the stream. That becomes a shlishi. A shlishi cannot impart truma further by truma. The end of the line of truma is shlishi. And I know that by liquids, there was a rabbinic decree that liquids go back into a rishon. That's only if it's a sheni, not if it's a shlishi. So really, you're going to have now a mixture of that part of the stream that touched the Tul Yoim is Tameh, and everything else is Tahar. Question now is it nullified? That's the case in Tul Yoim. So it says, if someone is pouring Truma liquid from one utensil to the other, the Nagot Tul Yoim b'kiluach, and the Tul Yoim touched the stream, which again means that only the part of the stream that had physical contact with the Tul Yoim becomes Tameh on a level of a Shlishi, and nothing else will become Tameh. So the Mishnah writes, Yalla be'echad umeya. What will be the status now of everything? The stream was in the air for a second. Now everything is in the cup in the bottom. So the Mishnah says that if the amount in the cup is more, 100 or more, than the little part of the stream that was touched, so then the tuma is nullified befedish. Now hold on. We have a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. If Beis Hillel was moided to Beis Shammai, then no one holds its bottle. So ve'im toimer Beis Hillel were the ones that were hoidu leBeis Shammai that what shaloi taleh, that it's not going to be nullified. Then man tono hachatala. Then who would be the author of this Mishnah? It would be not Beis Shammai, not Beis Hillel. That's a problem. Says Araya that Beis Shammai was moided to Beis Hillel. Proof number two, says the Gemara. Proof number two is not a proof. Why not? And this is a very important rule, my friends. It's not uncommon that people change their minds. We have right now, we know Beis Shammai changed their mind. They acquiesced to Beis Hillel. All of us. You have an opinion, and then you learn more, and then you can change your mind. But when Mishnayos were written, once the Mishnah was written with the original opinion, they never undid that Mishnah. That's not the way it works. It's called Mishnah lo yizazam im kaima. We learned this throughout Shas many times. And we know that also from our lives. It's called Mishnah lo yizazam im kaima. The Mishnah cannot be uprooted, even though the halacha changed. When people memorize something properly, It's very difficult to unmemorize it. And that's the way the whole Torah Shabal Peh was learned by heart. People reviewed everything by heart. So says the Gemara, it's not a proof. Could be Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel was moided to Beis Shammai. And at a later time, everyone was of the opinion that the Tumah is not nullified. So who authored the Mishnah in Tful Yom? Beis Shammai. Before they acquiesced. I'm sorry, who authored Beis Hillel? Before they acquiesced. So, but why didn't Rabbeinu HaKadosh change the Mishnah? It doesn't work that way. And we are expected to know which Mishnah nowadays no longer stands. And still we learn the Mishnah. Amar Rab Chanina b'Rei Rab Hillel, that what? Noimad, I will tell you perhaps Beis Hillel Shanu Isa, the author of the Mishnah in Tful Yom was Beis Hillel, when before they were moided to Beis Shammai. He doesn't, in the Bavli, they would say the words, Mishnah lo izazim kaima. In the Yerushalmi, we're abbreviating everything. It's self-understood. Okay, doesn't matter. So the second proof is not a proof. Proof number 3. Amar Rabbi Yosi Masnisa Amar Kain. Our Mishnah itself, from our Mishnah, you can see that Beis Shammai was moided to Beis Hillel, because the Mishnah writes, and now we're quoting the Mishnah, that the Achar Shahoidu, after they conceded, so then Rabbi Eliezer Oimer, now what do you do? Meaning, what do you do? Clearly, the Mishnah is going on the premise that it is nullified. Now we have a machlokes, a new machlokes. Do you have to remove one saw? Rabbi Eliezer says yes, and you have to burn it. Like we said, Rabbi Eliezer is following his opinion in Halacha Aleph that Ani Oimer, that saw shenafla, that's the sasha also. Well, if the one that fell in was tamei and the one that you removed is tamei, you bet you got to burn it. Vayteidam v'tisarif. And the Chachamim say, like we said the words, that avda b'miyuta. There's no gezela shevet. Hold on a second. Really, I can tell you something. Really, the Gemara could have said, think about it. If Beis Hillel was moided to Beis Shammai, then what would be the din? What does Beis Shammai say? It's not nullified. Then what would be the din aviv? Then you have to burn the whole thing. So then the Gemara can say that there's no premise to argue. Everything has to be burnt. First of all, the Gemara could have said it. The Gemara is saying something even more. Rabbi Eliezer, fragt die Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer laf shamuti, who isn't Rabbi Eliezer shamute? Guys, this expression we have many a time. In the Bavli, we had a machlokes rishonim. What does it mean that Rabbi Eliezer is shamuti? What does that word mean? Some are of the opinion that the word shamta, shamuti, comes from the word shamta. Shamta means that he was put in a ban. And that's the story, if I'm not mistaken, in Bava Metzia Daf Nun Tes, Tanur Shalachnoi. If you remember that amazing story. And even though ultimately God himself, the Bas Koil, said that Rabbi Eliezer is right, they did not rule like him. And since he did not give in, Torah Lav Bashomayim, they put him in a ban. Tosfos says, it doesn't make sense. Even if someone was put into a ban, for him to be coined Rabbi Eliezer, the one that was banned, we would not do that. And they bring this Gemara, Yerushalmi Trumos. Shamute comes from the word Shammai. Rabbi Eliezer generally follows the Shita of Beis Shammai. Now, for people to appreciate some Jewish history, who remembers who was the teacher of Rabbi Eliezer? Where's the Gabbai? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And who was the teacher of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai? Hillel HaZaken. Remember that Gemara? That Hillel HaZaken had, I think, 120 Talmidim or 80 Talmidim. The greatest was, I think, Yonasan ben Uziel, right? And so to say, the weakest, imagine, was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Remember that Gemara? And they were so great that if birds would fly over their heads when they would learn, they would get burnt up. Bottom line is, I want you to know that Rabbi Eliezer was a student of Hillel. Doesn't matter. He paskined like Beis Shammai, which was the anomaly. And that's why he's called Shamutehu. So the Gemara is saying, since Rabbi Eliezer himself follows Beis Shammai, how can he say only remove one and burn it? Beis Shammai is the one that says you have to burn all of it. So that's a great proof that what? That Beis Shammai acquiesced to Beis Hillel. Now I have a question. Why didn't the Gemara bring this as the first proof? If you're trying to understand the Mishnah, isn't bringing a proof from this Mishnah proper the best source? Perhaps. The Gemara Dafka organized it in this order because the Gemara wanted to remind us of the rule that Mishnah lo yizazim imekayma. I would say perhaps this proof is also really refuted. The Yerushalmi didn't have to spell it out. We should spell it out on our own. Why is this refuted? Maybe originally, even Rabbi Eliezer, he held like Beis Hillel. Originally, like I said, he was a student of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zajac. He was a student of Hillel. That means when he was younger, he learned like Beis Hillel. He was taught like Beis Hillel. Rabbi, that's right. Very good. Yeah. So Rabbi Eliezer now paskin that you remove one and you burn it. And then later, Rabbi Eliezer paskin like Beis Shammai. And later, Beis Hillel paskin like Beis Shammai, which means you have to burn everything. Why does Rabbi Eliezer say that you got to only remove one and burn it? Because that was what he held originally. And the Mishnah never changes the words. No, it's the same refutation to the proof that we had in proof number 2. I think you have in proof number 3. The way the Yerushalmi notifies you that is by organizing it the way it did, perhaps. Anyways, moving on. The final proof, the 4th proof. I got a brisa that explicitly says so. Masnisa amrakein. That what the words of the brisa regarding this argument is that achar shohoidu elu leelu, after the one acquiesced to the other. Now tala. Tala means it's nullified. So clearly you see that it went in the direction of the tumah being nullified. And for those who jumped on board right now, I was certain yesterday, prior to learning today's daf, that the Gemara is going to challenge Chizkiah. It doesn't. So I'm presuming, this is a presumption, that the reason why the Gemara doesn't have to bring it up is Adarabba. Since the conclusion of the 2 daf of Chizkiah, the explanation of Chizkiah was predicated on Shitas Rebbe Yehuda, that min b'min is not batel. That was the explanation. And not only are they physically like, but as we mentioned, the majority could become tamei. So therefore, we consider them halachically like according to Rabbi Yehuda is not nullified, which is the source of, which is the base of Chizkiah. Well, we don't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. If you're going to say that min b'min is batel, then we have a Beis Hillel, perhaps. Okay, moving on. Rabbi Yehuda is Atana. Okay, Beis Shammai. Misalkenloi. Problem is like this. In our Mishnah, before the Mishnah says that they acquiesced without even clarifying who acquiesced to who, the Mishnah recorded some of the back and forth between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. And the last argument the Mishnah recorded was Beis Shammai's rebuttal to Beis Hillel. So the Gemara asks a simple question. When 2 groups are having a debate, and you would say that the one who got the final word is the one that won the debate. Beis Shammai had the final word. What was Beis Shammai? I just remind you, Beis Shammai had a gewaldic logic. Beis Shammai says that chulin is so powerfully permitted that even a non-kohen can eat chulin. Right? I use the words, the koyach of heter. Chulin is really something that's permitted. Something that's mamish permitted can overwhelm truma, can nullify it. Beis Shammai says, but truma tohoira is not as permitted as chulin, right, Aviv? Because truma tohoira can only be eaten by kohanim. Truma is also prohibited to a non-kohen. So it's not something inherently permitted. So maybe since the tamei fell into something that's not mamish permitted, maybe the power of nullifying is not there. That was the last argument that the Mishnah wrote. So the Gemara is asking that Beis Shammai was the ones that misalken loin. Beis Shammai were the ones that got on the final word. And you're telling me now that at the end Beis Shammai acquiesced to Beis Hillel, but they had a gewaldic logic. So Amar Rabbi Avin says, well, why did Rebbe not put it in the Mishnah? We don't know. I don't know. Actually, Beis Hillel did respond to it. And this response is recorded in a braisa that was taught by Rabbi Oishia. Yesh kan shuva acheres. Where do we find the rebuttal of Beis Hillel to Beis Shammai? Kahadad the Tani Rabbi Oishia, which was common. Right? Rabbi Oishia was one of the great compilers of the braisos. And he had the rebuttal. And what was the rebuttal? Let me say it by heart. The whole logic of Beis Shammai was when you're looking at something that's being nullified, there are two components of it. It's very simple. This you have the majority component, the one that's being mivatel, and then you have the item that's becoming nullified. You got that? The focus of Beis Shammai, their proof to Beis Hillel is that they were focusing on the mivatel. They were saying chulin has a greater koyach to be mevatel more than truma because it's completely mutter. Fine. Beis Hillel told Beis Shammai, why are you looking at the mivatel? Look at the item that's becoming nullified, which is ma tohoira. When it comes to truma that's tahor, what's the din of truma that's tahor? Truma that's tahor that falls into chulin, if the ratio is 100-1, it becomes nullified. Now, don't look at the mivatel. Look at the item that's becoming nullified. Do you know how serious of a violation it is for a non-kohen to eat truma? The penalty is misa b'idei shamayim. So when it comes to truma, tohoira, that fell into 100 chulin. I know chulin has a koyach of a heter, but something that's so prohibited, which is shehi b'avoin misa eitzel azorim. Nevertheless, if it fell into the ratio of 100-1, oile, it's nullified. So in our Mishnah says Beis Hillel to Beis Shammai, what happened over here? Truma Tameya, by the way, Truma Tameya is never something that was going to be eaten by a non-kohen. Truma Tameya is Truma. Nervous then, a kohen is not allowed to eat Truma Tameya. What's the penalty for a kohen who's pure? To eat Truma Tameya, it's a violation, according to the Yerushalmi, of a positive commandment only. That means that the item that needs to get nullified is not something nearly as prohibited as normal Truma Tohaira. So therefore, Beis Hillel responded that when it comes to Truma Tameya, which is only a Ba'asei Eitz LaKohanim, Loi Kolchchein, that it should be nullified by Truma Tohaira, because it's an item that is nullifiable. It's easy to nullify it. And that was the argument for which Beis Shammai agreed to Beis Hillel. And I love that because you have to look not at the mivatel, look at the stubbornness, look at the strength of the item that's refusing to become nullified. And this is an item whose prohibition in the outset is weak. So therefore it is nullified. Okay. Chavra, moving on. So now we're going on to the next case for people that are joining right now, and that is what was the next case in the Mishnah? You had the normal case. You had 1 sa'ah, 1 pound of truma, and it fell into 100 pounds of chulin. That is the law. Biblically, it would be nullified in a majority. Rabbinically, you have to have the ratio of 100-1, and you have it. Nevertheless, we learned, even though it's nullified, I'm not a kohen. I began with 100 pounds. A kohen's pound fell into mine.
Wait, nullified to who? Nullified to who?
Very good. So nullified means there are two issues here. There's a financial issue, and then there is a legal issue, a permitted, prohibited issue. I'm not a kohen, Baruch. I am not allowed to eat truma. Let's say you are a kohen. All right?
Yeah.
So if I had 100 pounds of flour of chulin, which means non-truma flour that anyone can eat, you, a kohen, you have your pound of truma. It's not only that financially it belongs to you. Aside of that, I, as a Yisrael or a Levi, I am not allowed to eat truma. Nevertheless, it fell in and it got mixed up together. So the rule is that when you have the ratio, not of majority, not of 60-1, you have 100-1, not 1 and 99. 1 truma into 100 chulin, it becomes nullified. That's step number 1. What does nullified mean, Baruch? That I am allowed to eat the mixture. Even though there is a small minus a percent of truma, halachically it's nullified. But how can I eat the whole thing like I'm a ganif? I only owned 100 pounds. So for that, the rabbi said, I have to remove any pound, remove a pound. I'm calling that the replacement pound and give it to a kohen. And I give it back. Okay, that's number one. Now the Mishnah spoke about a scenario
when you do
I
it too,
removed my
just a little
replacement
step that I
pound.
typically don't do.
When I removed my replacement pound before I gave it back to you to Kohen, I'm a shlamazel. I have another pile of chulin, another pile. The replacement fell into the new pile. Again, I created chaos.
Can't say that.
So like this. How do we view the replacement pound? Rabbi Eliezer says that since the rabbis demanded for me to gave
What's the picture on the armrest? I don't see it.
status of true, if it fell into, I'm calling it now mixture number two. Mixture
You
number
just
two
froze.
has to have
You
again
just froze
100.
with that. You just
Huh?
froze with that. You just froze with that last really great statement.
Okay, so mixture number two has to have again 100 pounds to nullify the replacement. Rabbi Eliezer. The Chachamim say, no. The Chachamim say like this. Look at the ratio that you have in the 100, in the pound. What's the ratio of truma in the pound? The truma is what part of it? 1 out of 101, less than 1%. That I'm going to round it off to 1%. That 1% has to have 100 against it in mixture number two. Mixture number two doesn't have to have the ratio against the whole pound. It only has to have the ratio.
So you're saying then if I would do that, blow it at the same time.
Towards the replacement. 101 ratio towards the calculation of the percent of truma. Comes along Rabbi Yochanan and he makes a statement. And we don't know who is he following. He says, saw truma. Shenafla lemeya. If he begins with the case, you have one soft truma that falls into 100 of chulin. You see, he's being very brief. And what do you do now, Aviv? You remove. We're calling that replacement. You remove one saw. Now this replacement fell into other chulin. Comes along Rabbi Yochanan and he says, chulin kol shein mevatlin oisa. You don't even need to have 100 of the mixture number two against the proportion. You don't even need that. If it falls into any other chulin, all of it is okay. The logic behind this, there is a logic. What's the logic behind it? Based on the premise that when you originally had the 1 pound of truma that fell into 100 pounds of chulin, by law, the truma is nullified. There is no truma. The reason why I have to remove the replacement pound, it's a financial law. Because I don't own 101 pounds, I only owned 100. 1 pound came from the coin, give him back his pound. But it doesn't begin by us viewing that pound as truma. So it would make sense. It would now. So why are we having an issue with it? Because we said we said a few times, the Chachamim were afraid that if I, the owner of this mixture, won't view the replacement pound as truma, I might, God forbid, not be so honest financially. I'll say, yeah, there's no truma here, I'm good. And Rabbi Yochanan says, okay, when you give it back to a kohen, the moment it fell into a new mixture, you go back to the principle. What's the principle then? That none of it was truma. Rabbi Yochanan's statement makes sense. The problem is he can't argue with Tanoim. So what do you mean? Chulin kol shem mevatlin oisa. So they're going to ask Zigamar, Masnisa pligal Rabbi Yochanan. Our Mishnah clearly argues with Rabbi Yochanan. Certainly, he's not saying like Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, that doesn't matter. But the Chachamim say, you know what that means, Aviv? It means that mixture number two needs to have 100 against the 1 and 101.
But does he owe the truma anyway? Doesn't he owe the truma anyway?
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. So I want to go back to Baruch. The financial part will always have to be resolved. Very good. The question is, is the status property of the kohen, or is the status of the replacement truma? Truma has
There's a
sanctity.
lot of
Truma has
background noise.
restrictions.
Can someone shut down the background noise, please?
Okay, so now this answers the Gemara, and this is something that we try not to do. It must be that Rabbi Yochanan had a different girsa in our Mishnah. That's what Rabbi Yossi, b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, that loy tani Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan did not have the version that the Chachamim say, quoting the words that we have in our Mishnah, that Eino midamas ela lefi cheshbon. He did not have that text in the Mishnah. What was the words that Rabbi Yochanan had in the Mishnah? Eino midamas kol ikar. So when I removed the replacement, the rabbis gave it the status of truma. But still, the rabbi said that if it falls into another pile of chulin, it's getting too crazy. You're right, Baruch. I always will have to give a pound to a kohen. But we're not going to say, ooh, it was truma that got mixed with chulin. Now it messed up the chulin. And how much ratio do you need? Nothing. A drop of chulin. That's very, very unusual. Rabbi Yossi had a tradition that Rabbi Yochanan had another version in our Mishnah. Having said that, so now you think you know what you're talking about. You have Rabbi Eliezer, you have the Chachamim, our version. Now you have the Chachamim, Rabbi Yochanan's version. Now turn to Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, Baram Amar. However, Rabbi Yochanan added another law, and that law appears to contradict what we just said. What was the other law? For who meaning, if it falls into mixture number 2, you know when you have no truma issue. V'hu sheravas truma ala chulin. That the law that the replacement saw is nullified is even. V'hu means not only if the amount of truma in the replacement saw exceeds the chulin into which it fell. So let me make it clear. So I have a pound. How much truma is in this pound? In the replacement. It came from a mixture. You had 100 chulin and 1 truma. So the percent of truma in my replacement pound is 1 in 101. I wish I had, it would mean 2 grams. It's inaccurate, 2 grams. If it fell even into 1 gram of chulin, it's nullified. You got no problem. Vahu, okay, 1 second. This statement actually backs what we just said. But then he said, Vahu, when is this leniency true? Sherabu chulin al cheshbon truma. Only if there's more chulin than truma in order for it to be nullified in the majority. He's saying 2 statements. The second contradicted the first. Mamish. I mean, so the Gemara clarifies this Rabbi Lazar, my friends, is not the Tana. This Rabbi Lazar is an Amoira. Amar Rabbi Lazar says that the words Vehu, right? Vehu sherabu chulin ala truma. Rabbi Yochanan was now addressing a case that we never had. And let me say it by heart. So we're beginning the same. I am a Yisrael. I have 100 pounds of chulin. You have a pound of truma. It got mixed into mine. Since the ratio is 100 to 1, it's nullified. I have to remove it and give it to a kohen. Now the replacement saw, the one that I'm removing, instead of me giving it to a kohen, which I should do, it fell into another pile of produce. What produce? Meduma produce. Just to know what's meduma produce. Meduma produce is that if truma falls into chulin, and you don't have the ratio of 100 to 1, if it's even 1 in 99, all of it cannot be eaten by a kohen. None of it can be eaten by a non-kohen. It's called miduma. Miduma means mixed. It's a balagan. It's a mixture. It cannot be fixed. It can be fixed only if you add more chulin. If you add more chulin, bishoygek, which is the case over here. Very good, very good. So now let's halt up over here. So now a new thing. The Mishnah spoke about the replacement saw falling into chulin. Rabbi Yochanan had his version. We already said that. Now Rabbi Yochanan is addressing a new case. If the replacement saw falls into meduma, now what do you do? The meduma is prohibited. But like you just said, then what did you just say? That meduma cannot lechatchila be fixed. But if b'shoigeg, so let's say there was 1 in 99, 1 in 99, it's meduma. If someone were to add b'shoigeg, not with the intent of fixing it, 1 more pound of chulin, what would be the din? The whole meduma will become permitted. Now a pound fell in. Problem is, how do you view the pound? How do you view this pound? Does this pound, what did Rabbi Yochanan say? Rabbi Yochanan just said that when it falls into another mixture, how do we view this pound, Aviv? All of it. Like chulin, v'haraya, all of it. You don't even need to have roif truma against it. We don't care. Okay, so you would argue that according to Rabbi Yochanan, if the replacement pound falls into meduma, what should be the din? The whole meduma became permitted because it fell into he doesn't. That we don't say. Since meduma is not chulin, holds Rabbi Eliezer that if in the meduma, this is important, if in the meduma there is more chulin than the truma in the replacement. Guys, follow these words. If in the meduma there is a majority, there's more, not 100 to 1, there is more chulin than the truma in the replacement. How much truma is in the replacement then? Less than 1%. It's not a big deal for it to happen. But if in the meduma there is more chulin, which is normally the case, then Rabbi Yochanan will still say what he says. What does he say? That we view the replacement chulin, and that is matir, the whole meduma. But if in the meduma there isn't more chulin than that proportion, there is that little, it's a mixture of truma and chulin, but there's very little chulin in there. Very, very little chulin. So you know what we say? Listen to these words. We say that the truma in the replacement combines with the truma of the meduma, and now the whole replacement becomes meduma. The replacement becomes meduma. Why was the replacement not meduma? Because you have the ratio in the first mixture of 1 to 100. When it falls into meduma, if you don't have more chulin than the little amount of truma, it's kavaldik, then we say the truma of mixture number 2 is added to the truma in the replacement saw, and the status of the replacement saw gets messed up. So one impacts the other. Either the replacement saw is going to be added to the meduma, and it's going to be matir the meduma. How great is that? Or the truma in the meduma is going to be added to the little bit of truma in the replacement, and it's going to mess up the replacement, and everything will be messed up. Everything will be meduma. That's what messed up means. You have to know what the ratio is. You have to know what the ratios are. This is amazing. Now, says the Gemara, al date de Rabbi Lazar, why are we saying that the truma combines to the truma? Why don't we say that the chulin combines to the chulin? Why are you only going in that direction? This is the Amoida. Why are we saying truma combines with truma? Why don't we say chulin shalom mailan? Okay, I want to say this. The word shalom mailan means the replacement fell into mixture number 2. So just physically, normally that would happen, that mixture, the meduma was on the ground, and me, the genius over here, instead of just giving it to the kohen, the shlomai, by mistake, it fell into the meduma. So why don't we say that the chulin shalamaylan, which means that the chulin inside the replacement and the chulin shalamatan and the chulin inside the meduma, why don't they combine? In other words, why are we not taking chulin into account? That's the Gemara's kasha. Answers the Gemara, Sava Rabbi Lazar Meima, Rabbi Lazar, the Amoid explains, chulin shalamatan, the chulin in meduma they have the status of someone that's deaf. That's an interesting expression. Nasu chershin. In other words, The moment chulin is rendered meduma, this is very foundational over here. What is meduma? So you can argue meduma is truma. It's not.
It's
So
a
we were
mixture
saying
of
that the Chachamim
teruma.
hold that meduma is a mixture of truma and chulin. Rabbi Elazar doesn't view it that way. Once the truma is not nullified, even though we're not saying that everything became truma, we're not saying that. Right? When I sell meduma to a kohen, Aviv, I charge him for the meduma. I only give him for free the truma. We don't call it chulin. We call it truma and meduma. There is no chulin. Chulin becomes death. So you don't have chulin to combine with chulin. You do have truma to combine with truma. So we began now, we're going to continue tomorrow, we began to introduce the concept that's called chayzer v'neir. Something was already nullified. Let me go in the first mixture. This is so good. 1 pound and 100 pounds. You're telling me that the truma is nullified. The truma is nullified, but it's still dormant. And if it falls into chulin, according to Rabbi Yochanan, he's very lenient. Falls into chulin, I don't care. Kol shehein of chulin, you're good. If it falls into meduma, at times the truma of the meduma is going to change the status of the replacement. So the truma will combine with the truma. And let me say something beautiful. Truma is something holy. And let's say that holy never gets nullified. Never gets nullified. Holy at worst gets dormant. That's called galus. But it's there. And now if you mix it with something else that's holy, the holy of one wakes up the holy in the first. And they combine